Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I hope the week's going well. It remains quite cold here in Nairobi, and from my Twitter feed I can see it's cold pretty much across sub-Saharan Africa. Let me start with macro thoughts. Oil jumped bigly yesterday as the US pushed its allies to halt imports of Iranian crude. WTI rallied over 3.5% and crossed $70 a barrel. Brent was up 2.1%. Have a look at this chart from Olga. And I conclude by saying, Barack Obama's oil warfare strategy has been flipped on its head, because I think Barack Obama was seeking to suppress the price of oil, to put pressure on the Saudi treasury and other recalcitrants to bring them all to the table for his flagship Iranian deal. And essentially we've seen that turned around and prices lifted, in part to Greece, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's rise up the pole, amongst other things, also been very helpful for Vladimir Putin. China seems to be preparing for a full trade war. The yuan drops to the weakest level versus the dollar in 6 months. And then this story, China weaponizing soya in response to Trump tariffs, cuts tariffs on soybean imports from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and South Korea to 0% from July. All five are small players in the market, which is dominated by the US, Brazil, and Argentina. But the point is, and I said this before when I used the example of Dustin Hoffman, in The Marathon Man, and to me China is using a surgical scalpel and Trump is firing a bazooka. In the bond markets the world is getting flatter. US 2s, 10s yield spread drops below 35 basis points. Historically this has signaled a recession. Yale's Schiller calls Bitcoin a social movement. It's an epidemic of enthusiasm. It is a speculative bubble. This doesn't mean that it will go to zero, he said. Home thoughts, Messi becomes the first player to have scored a World Cup goal as a teenager, 18 in 2006, in his 20s, 26, 27 in 2014, and in his 30s, 31 years old. But he's carrying his whole team. I don't think he can carry them much more. Words of the day, simmer dim. The endless twilight of days around the summer solstice when true dark never falls. In Scandinavia, these are known as the white nights. Are there other terms in other languages? And then I came across the New Statesman talking about the importance of light to the residents of Fair Isle. Midsummer in Shetland is a time of light. Although the Arctic Circle at 66 degrees north marks the southernmost reaches of 24-hour sunshine, here at 60 degrees we can still enjoy light throughout the day. At the moment the sun sets around 10:30 in the evening and rises again about 3:30 a.m. The 5 hours in between are a time of prolonged dusk, known in Shetland as the simmer dim. If the sky is clear, then it remains light enough to read outside for the entire night. I like this photograph. Parking lot on Lake Turkana, free of any clamp-wielding humans running around in yellow jackets, Peter size 10. And then I saw a tweet by Charlie Mayhew about the Safaricom Marathon, which has raised $7.5 million for conservation communities in Kenya, hoping to raise vital funds again next weekend. We went out there with Mr. Collymore a while back, and literally we could hear the lions just prowling round the perimeter of the tent site where we were staying that night, and it was very chilly as well. Political reflections. Yemenis in Hodeidah cool under pressure despite approaching storm. Look, I know that Saudi Arabia is going to visit the wrath of the House of Saud on them for being so pertinent, but as I said in November 2017, MBS arrived on the scene and immediately launched an unwinnable war in the Yemen, and it is. Robert Fisk in The Independent, "This moment will go down in history. The US has given up on the overthrow of Assad. It will be called a great betrayal, and it was a long time coming, but the grim message from Washington to the anti-Assad fighters of southern Syria that they could expect no help from the West in their further struggle against Assad's regime or the Russians will one day figure in the history books. It's a turning point in the Syria war, a shameful betrayal if you happen to belong to the wreckage of the Free Syrian Army and its acolytes around the city of Deraa, and a further victory for the Assad regime in its ambition to retake all of rebel Syria. Already Russian missiles and Syrian bombs are embracing the countryside south and east of Deraa and outside Quneitra and Suwaida after the opposition fighters refused a negotiated peace last week. Washington understands the difficult conditions its militia allies are facing and says it advises the Russians and Syrians not to violate a ceasefire, which was Moscow's idea in the first place. You know that the Americans are pulling the carpet from beneath another set of allies. Syria fears that the Israelis will now create their own buffer zone below Golan, similar in style, weaponry and ruthlessness to Israel's former occupation zone in southern Lebanon. This lasted for 22 years, but fell to pieces when Israel's local Lebanese militia, the South Lebanon Army, an inefficient, untrustworthy, and occasionally as fictitious as the Free Syrian Army, retreated along with the Israelis in 2000. I concluded by saying Bashar has proved the only fellow who has resisted the regime changes ever in the Middle East. Jim Mattis is making his first visit to China by a Pentagon chief in years. Roberts wrote that presidents have substantial power to regulate immigration. It was a 5-4 decision on Tuesday in the court's first substantive ruling on a Trump administrative policy. 5-4. And then I like this from Tim O'Brien, Mar-a-Lago, Spanish for think tank, because apparently on at least 4 occasions Trump sought feedback from Mar-a-Lago members for important policy and staffing positions. At 49.6%, white Generation Z+, those born after 2007, is the first minority white generation. Interesting. Europe is now condemned to suffer 2 populist autocracies on its eastern borders, Putin's Russia and Erdogan's Turkey. To the utter despair of stoic defenders of Western values, Europe is now condemned to suffer 2 populist autocracies on its eastern borders, Russia and Turkey. This is Pepe Escobar in the Asia Times. It was a good gesture that both His Excellency Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar shook hands, setting into motion the fruitful meeting we had today. President Museveni, and apparently they've signed something, but they've signed hundreds of things before. I think they are both prima facie not competent to resolve this matter, given their past track records. Stop lost them both. Ethiopia greets Eritreans with flowers for the first talk since the war. Wasn't sure I'd ever see the day the Eritrean flag would be displayed in the streets of Addis Ababa, says Puntland Pirates. And in this photograph, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed is seen warmly welcoming the Eritrean delegation at Bole Airport. Look, as I've said severally, he's a game changer. He's a Gladwellian character. He's sending love viruses all around. Look at this. Eritrea is a classic example of reacting well to love. He is, I think, outflanking all his opposition, which seems very static around him. And I think also, he wore a shirt of Nelson Mandela and the Black Power salute. 1994 is a recognizable part of African history, given the demographic skew. Earlier than that, freedom fighters, independence, this is not resonating anymore. It's quite interesting. Finally, I like this photograph that Emmanuel Macron posted of him with the Pope, whom I like a great deal. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar 116.55, dollar index 94.63, Japanese yen 109.69, Swiss franc 0.9898, the pound 132.14, the Australian dollars below 74.7380. Emerging softer, higher beta currencies are really continue to weaken. India rupee 68.55, that must be a record low. South Korean won 11.1738. And I'm seeing quite a lot of research which is inclined to believe that the South Korean won gets the most affected by trade war of the liquid currencies. Brazilian real 379.77, Egyptian pound 17.8863. That's held in rather well, of course, because they took all that pain a couple of years ago. And the South African rand at 13.55.30. King dollar marches on, dollar index. This is a chart from Holger. Look, I think the narrative is still unfolding. Euro dollar last trading at 116.54, 115.15, which was a double bottom, is now key support. Oil above $70, $70.45 last. Iran. Have a look at this more exotic chart from Chi Girl. Remember, with every action, there is an opposite reaction. We left a trail below, she tweeted. Gold, $12.58, looking for some stability in the dollar before I think it can make any upside headway. Here we go, Chinese market starting to act up. This is from David Inglis. As I said, on the 14th of May, this is all the ingredients for baking a good old-fashioned crisis. Bears looking almost in complete control across emerging markets. Index about just 4% away from entering a bear market, which is what I was kind of predicting in that article. Let's move on to Sub-Saharan Africa. Sudan's Bashir orders the reopening of the border with South Sudan. I couldn't resist this headline. Porn detectors and a Twitter tax, how one African nation is tightening its grip on the internet. Porn apparently is still the most popular part of the internet here in Africa. China says it will increase its military presence in Africa. For decades, China's presence in Africa has largely focused on economic, commercial, peacekeeping activities. Now Beijing is building on that by establishing greater military links to protect its national assets on the continent and gain greater geopolitical influence. The People's Liberation Army conducts regular joint training exercises across the region and in certain countries that are home to major Chinese infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. The communist state has been especially active. Djibouti, where Chinese companies have constructed strategic ports and Africa's first electric transnational railway. Beijing last year formally launched its first overseas military base, also operates as a logistics and intelligence facility. Many experts now anticipate more Chinese bases in the years to come, with Namibia rumored as a potential location. Meanwhile, in Tanzania, state-run conglomerate China Merchants Holding International is hoping to invest in the Bagamoyo mega port. So that's another development. In recent years, Chinese arms sales to Africa have surpassed the United States, and Luke Patty. The concern from a lot of partners is exactly what role China is going to play in the region and how it's going to fit in with its existing military organizations and security forums. It's really an unsettling element of something new coming into the equation that's got a lot of people concerned. African countries should be clear-eyed. The days of China's strict adherence to its long-standing non-interference policy are over. I wrote about this in an article in August last year, China Rising. It's really been a breathtaking geopolitical advance. This is Paul Biya's genocide squad in action. This is how they claim to protect the citizens in the Amazonian town of Bamenda today. Have a look at that. WhatsApp is getting set to be Africa's biggest payments and ad platform, says Quartz. Africa, competitive advantage is in emerging markets where its service almost always works, regardless of internet speed or available bandwidth. World's #1 messaging service, thanks to users from Latin America to Africa and most of Asia outside China. And they're talking about the opportunity here to create a payment and a messaging platform. They've penetrated the most in Africa of any platform, and I think absolutely they're going to be a very fierce competitor. And it's also talking about the challenge that would come from them versus fintechs as well. Angola's capital, Luanda, is now down to 6th on the list of the world's most expensive cities for expats. Hong Kong and Tokyo come top. Zim leader hints on plan to bring back dreaded Zim dollar. We are building reserves of gold and diamonds, which if they reach a certain level, I will not tell you here, it will then allow us to introduce our own currency that will be backed by those minerals. I'm not at liberty to disclose to you the level that we want those minerals to reach before they can back our currency, Mangan Godkwal was quoted as saying. IHS drops plan for IPO in New York that would have valued the company at $10 billion. 3 African towers IPOs have been pulled. South African all-share down 7.14% year-to-date. Christo Visas cut his stake in Africa's biggest supermarket chain, Big ShopRite. Dollar Rand, we're back at 13.55. I never thought we'd get up here, but it looks like we're going to 14. Nigerian all shares minus 0.67% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down, up 11.61% year to date. Vodafone Ghana IPO plan after government talks over funding. Malawi is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for people living with albinism, who are targeted so that their body parts can be used in magic potions and other ritual practices. I concluded each body was worth about $25,000 at the village price, which is quite high. After floods and famine, this tiny African country, Malawi, is bullish on growth. This is in an article in Bloomberg. Abraj founder faces arrest warrant in the UAE for allegedly writing bad checks. Do you remember that quote of his? Today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. Kenya, the Northern Corridor Integration Project Summit kicked off in Nairobi yesterday morning. This is a photograph from that summit posted by His Excellency President Kenyatta. Muhoho Kenyatta, who's the brother of President Kenyatta, has been named among individuals who imported duty-free sugar last year. And what we can safely say is, by pulling the veil there, that it's a serious departure, actually, in the level of political intensity, fighting intensity. The interesting thing is we're getting all the information, but this is a very interesting development. The DPP, this is a tweet of the supposed partner, Mr. Jaswant Rai. He must arrest this man to protect the Kenyan people. According to the Cabinet Secretary, Kianjuri, total, wait for it, 1,061,000 metric tons of sugar was imported into the country when the Treasury opened the tax-free window. That, according to the calculation from Kenyan Boy, is $660 million of taxes that were not paid. So it's a pretty substantial deal. Nairobi all shares up 1.69% year to date, but down 11.431% since April 5's record high. I attended a signing ceremony between Saiton and Taleri from Finland, and we've posted a link to the presentation by Antti Jussi, who's the head of real estate in Africa, and he had an interesting perspective on things. NSE 20 down 11.43% year to date. The annual UNESCO World Heritage Committee meeting started on Sunday will debate about adding Kenya's Lake Turkana to sites considered to be in danger, and so they should. And if you've got a second, have a look at this video. Human-wildlife conflict remains one of the most significant threats to big cats. Explorer Shivani Bala's organization, Iwaso Alliance, have been following for a while on social media, offers a solution. Very interesting from the National Geographic. Thank you kindly for stopping by.
Happened in the last couple of years. People have accepted lions, tolerated them. The lions feel areas that they're safe in.